Bound by duty, freed by love. The skies above Earth were a patchwork of ash and sunlight, streaked with the shimmering silhouettes of Nyvarian dreadnoughts. Their crystalline surfaces refracted light like prisms, casting spectral hues over a city reduced to rubble. It was a scene of alien beauty juxtaposed against the horror of conquest. Dezryn crouched behind the remains of a toppled monument, its plaque half buried in dust. His keen eyes scanned the horizon, alert for any sign of movement. He was a rebel, in every sense of the word, lean and hardened by survival, his every action a defiance of the empire that had torn his world apart. A faint breeze stirred his tattered cloak, carrying with it the acrid scent of scorched earth. The communicator on his wrist pulsed softly, breaking the silence. Dezryn tapped it with a practiced motion, keeping his voice low. "Go ahead." Tarek's voice crackled through the static.
Sector 12's crawling with guards. No sign of the target. You sure she's here? She's here, Dezryn replied, his tone unwavering. Stay on your route and keep quiet. We can't afford mistakes. Copy that. Be careful out there.
Dezryn cut the link and adjusted his weapon, a scavenged blaster that had seen better days. The target was unlike anything he'd ever been tasked to recover. Imperial royalty, a princess rumored to be defying her own empire, hiding among the ruins of Earth. It sounded absurd, yet the intel had been clear. If she existed, if she was here, then she was the key to something bigger than all of them. He moved swiftly, his boots crunching softly over broken glass and debris. Each step was calculated, every shadow a potential hiding place. He had learned long ago that survival meant being invisible, a ghost in the chaos. The remnants of the city loomed around him, hollowed-out buildings, shattered vehicles, and the skeletal remains of what had once been a thriving metropolis. The coordinates led him to the remnants of a library, its grand facade cracked and crumbling. A faint sound, barely more than a whisper, made him freeze. Footsteps. Not the heavy, methodical steps of Nyvarian patrols, but something lighter, more uncertain. Dezryn pressed himself against the wall, his heart pounding. A figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked in a silvery fabric that seemed to shimmer even in the dim light. Her movements were graceful, almost otherworldly, and her luminous skin seemed to glow faintly. She was Nyvarian, unmistakably so. Her eyes, a piercing sapphire blue, swept the area with a mixture of caution and determination. Dezryn stepped into her path, his blaster raised, but not aimed. "Princess Lysara," he said, his voice steady. "You're coming with me." She froze, her gaze locking onto his. For a moment there was nothing but silence, the air between them charged with tension. Then her expression shifted, fear giving way to a regal defiance that sent a chill down Dezryn's spine. "And who," she said, her voice carrying the melodic lilt of the Nyvarian tongue, "are you to command me?" "A friend," Dezryn replied. "Or the closest thing you've got to one right now. You've got Imperial patrols closing in. Unless you want to be dragged back in chains, I suggest you come quietly." Lysara's eyes narrowed, her fingers twitching as if considering some hidden weapon. But the distant hum of engines growing louder made her decision for her. With a reluctant nod, she stepped forward.
"Lead the
way." Dezryn grabbed her wrist, pulling her into motion. Her skin was cool to the touch, an odd contrast to the warmth of his own. They moved quickly, weaving through the labyrinth of ruins with Dezryn leading the way. The hum of patrol vehicles grew louder, the searchlights cutting through the swirling dust. Lysara stumbled over a chunk of rubble, and Dezryn caught her arm, steadying her. "Keep up," he said sharply. "This isn't a stroll through the Imperial Gardens." She shot him a glare but said nothing, her focus shifting to the path ahead. Despite her royal demeanor, there was a vulnerability in her movements, a hesitance that betrayed her unfamiliarity with such harsh conditions. Dezryn found himself glancing back at her more often than he intended, his irritation mingling with a flicker of concern. They ducked into an alcove as a patrol ship passed overhead, its engines roaring like a distant storm. Dezryn pressed Lysara against the wall, shielding her with his body as the searchlight swept past. The nearness of her presence was disconcerting. Her breath was soft against his neck, her luminous eyes inches from his. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. "Is this part of the rescue?" she whispered, her tone laced with sarcasm. Dezryn smirked despite himself. "Only the glamorous parts." The patrol moved on, and Dezryn signaled for her to follow. They reached the entrance to a hidden passage, an old maintenance tunnel concealed beneath a collapsed subway station. Dezryn activated the panel, the door sliding open with a low hiss. He ushered Lysara inside and sealed it behind them. The chamber was sparse but functional, its walls lined with supplies and equipment. Lysara sank onto a cot, her regal composure faltering as exhaustion took hold. Dezryn leaned against the wall, watching her carefully. "You're not what I expected," he said after a moment. "And what did you expect?" She shot back, her tone sharper than before. "Someone colder," Dezryn admitted. "Imperial royalty doesn't exactly scream runaway rebel." Lysara's expression softened, a shadow passing over her features. "I didn't choose this life," she said quietly. "The Empire calls it duty, but it's a cage. I couldn't be part of it anymore." Dezryn studied her, his skepticism waning. There was a sincerity in her voice, a rawness that caught him off guard. "So what now? You think running will solve anything?" "I don't know," she admitted, her gaze dropping to her hands. "But I couldn't stay. Not after everything I've seen. The destruction, the suffering. I had to try." For a moment, there was silence between them, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Dezryn felt a pang of empathy, a connection he hadn't anticipated. Despite their differences, they were both fighting against forces far greater than themselves. "Well," he said finally, his voice softer, "you're not alone anymore. We'll figure this out. Together." Lysara looked up at him, her sapphire eyes shimmering with something he couldn't quite name. Gratitude, hope, whatever it was, it stirred something deep within him, a warmth that defied the cold reality of their situation. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dezryn nodded, his resolve hardening. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: he would protect her, no matter the cost. The dim light of the hidden chamber flickered, casting long shadows over the walls as Dezryn sifted through a pile of salvaged equipment. The weight of their precarious alliance hung heavy in the air, unspoken yet undeniable. Lysara sat across from him, her elegant frame draped in the silvery cloak she had worn when they first met. She appeared deep in thought, her hands tracing idle patterns on the cot's frayed fabric. Dezryn finally broke the silence. "You're lucky to have made it this far on your own. The Nyvarian patrols are relentless. How did you avoid them?" Lysara glanced up, her sapphire eyes gleaming faintly in the dim light. "I may be out of practice, but I'm not helpless," she replied, her voice carrying a note of pride. "There are ways to move unseen. Nyvarian cloaking technology isn't as infallible as they'd like you to believe." Dezryn raised an eyebrow. "So you're telling me you outsmarted your own people?" A flicker of a smile touched her lips, though it quickly faded. "They're not my people," she said quietly. "Not anymore." Her words hung in the air, a raw confession that Dezryn couldn't ignore. He studied her for a moment, the sharp angles of her face softened by the flickering light. There was a vulnerability there, a crack in the armor of royal composure she worked so hard to maintain. "Fair enough," he said, turning his attention back to the gear. "But if you want to survive down here, you'll need more than cloaking tricks. This isn't the Empire, it's Earth. We play dirty." Lysara's gaze hardened. "You think I don't know what survival means? I've lived in luxury, yes, but I've seen the cost of it. I've watched planets burn in the name of the Empire's so-called order. I'm not blind, Dezryn." The sharpness in her voice caught him off guard, and for a moment he was at a loss for words. She wasn't just another Imperial deserter. She carried the weight of her choices, the guilt of complicity, and the resolve to make amends. "All right," he said finally, his tone softer. "Let's focus on staying ahead of the patrols. If we're lucky, we can find a safe route to the rebel stronghold by nightfall. Luck has little to do with it, Lysara muttered, rising to her feet. What's the plan? Dezryn admired her determination, though he wasn't sure if it stemmed from courage or sheer stubbornness. Either way, it was something they'd need in the days to come. He motioned for her to follow as he opened a concealed hatch leading to a network of underground tunnels. These passages connect to the old subway lines, he explained. Most of the patrols don't bother with them. They're too unstable, but if we're careful, we can use them to stay out of sight. Lysara hesitated for a moment, her gaze sweeping over the narrow, dimly lit tunnel. And if they collapse? Then we'll have bigger problems than the patrols, Dezryn replied, with a smirk. Trust me, princess, I've been through worse. Stop calling me that, she said sharply, stepping into the tunnel. I'm not a princess anymore. Dezryn's smirk faded, replaced by a thoughtful expression. He didn't argue. Instead, he led the way, his steps sure and measured despite the uneven ground. Lysara followed close behind, her cloak trailing like liquid silver in the faint light. The air in the tunnels was damp and stale, carrying the faint scent of decay. Every sound seemed amplified. The crunch of debris underfoot, the distant drip of water, the occasional scurrying of unseen creatures. Dezryn kept his blaster at the ready, his senses attuned to every shift in the shadows. Do you trust your rebel allies? Lysara asked after a long stretch of silence. Dezryn glanced back at her, his expression unreadable. I trust some of them, he said. Enough to know they won't sell us out, but trust isn't something we hand out freely. You'll have to earn it. And how do I do that? She asked, her tone edged with skepticism. By surviving, Dezryn replied simply, and by proving you're not just another imperial pawn. Lysara bristled at his words but said nothing. She knew there was truth in them, even if it stung. The Empire had shaped her, molded her into a symbol of its power. Escaping that shadow wouldn't be easy. They emerged into a wider chamber, the remnants of an old subway platform. Dezryn motioned for Lysara to stay back as he scanned the area. The faint hum of a patrol drone echoed through the tunnels, growing louder with each passing second. Stay low, Dezryn whispered, pulling her into the shadows of a crumbling pillar. The drone's searchlight swept over the platform, illuminating every crack and crevice. Dezryn's grip on his blaster tightened, his breath steady and controlled. Lysara pressed close to him, her breath warm against his neck. Despite the tension of the moment, Dezryn couldn't ignore the subtle electricity that seemed to spark between them. It was distracting, dangerous even, but he forced himself to focus. The drone lingered for what felt like an eternity before finally moving on. Dezryn let out a slow breath, his shoulders relaxing. That was too close, he muttered. Is it always like this? Lysara asked, her voice low. Pretty much, Dezryn replied, stepping out from the shadows. Welcome to the resistance. They continued deeper into the tunnels, the oppressive silence broken only by the occasional rumble of distant activity above. Dezryn could feel Lysara's unease, though she hid it well. Her regal composure was still intact, but cracks were beginning to show. As they reached another junction, Dezryn stopped and turned to face her. This is where it gets tricky, he said. The next stretch is heavily monitored. We'll need to move fast and stay out of sight. Lysara nodded, her resolve evident. Lead the way. For a moment, Dezryn hesitated. He had doubted her, at first questioning whether she had the strength to endure the hardships of their journey. But now, seeing the fire in her eyes, he realized she was stronger than he had given her credit for. Stay close, he said, his voice softer than before. And whatever happens, don't stop. Their journey through the monitored stretch was a blur of adrenaline and instinct. Dezryn led the way with practiced ease, weaving through obstacles and avoiding detection with a precision born of experience. Lysara kept pace, her movements graceful despite the treacherous terrain. When they finally reached the relative safety of a concealed alcove, Dezryn allowed himself a moment to breathe. Lysara leaned against the wall, her chest rising and falling as she caught her breath. You're better at this than I expected, Dezryn admitted, his tone laced with grudging respect. Don't sound so surprised, Lysara replied, a faint smile tugging at her lips. I told you I'm not helpless. Dezryn chuckled softly, the sound echoing in the confined space. For the first time since their journey began, the tension between them seemed to ease. They were still strangers, in many ways, but the bond forged in shared danger was undeniable. As Dezryn watched her, he felt a flicker of something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't just admiration or respect. It was something deeper, something that scared him more than any Nyvarian patrol ever could. Come on, he said, breaking the silence. We're not out of the woods yet. Lysara nodded, her expression unreadable. But as they set off once more, Dezryn couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was about more than just survival. Something was changing between them, something neither of them could ignore. The narrow tunnels gave way to a cavernous expanse, the remnants of an ancient subway station long abandoned. Water dripped from the ceiling, pooling in shallow puddles that reflected the dim light of Dezryn's handheld lantern. The echo of their footsteps seemed unnaturally loud, a reminder of how exposed they were in this moment of stillness. Dezryn slowed, scanning the vast chamber for signs of danger. Lysara followed a few steps behind, her movements silent but precise, her silvery cloak now marred with streaks of grime. The royal shimmer of her presence was fading, replaced by a hardened resolve that Dezryn couldn't help but notice. We're close to the surface, Dezryn said in a low voice, gesturing to a rusted staircase partially hidden by debris. That'll take us to the outer districts. It's dangerous, but we don't have much choice. And your rebel allies are out there? Lysara asked, her voice tinged with skepticism. Not far from here, Dezryn replied, adjusting the strap of his gear pack. But we'll need to move carefully. The patrols will be thicker the closer we get to the perimeter. Lysara nodded, her expression serious. She glanced at the staircase, then back at Dezryn. Lead the way. Dezryn hesitated for a moment, studying her face. There was something different about her now, a sense of determination that hadn't been there before. He didn't know if it came from the perilous journey they had endured together, or from some internal shift she hadn't shared. Either way, he was starting to see her not as a liability, but as an equal. Stay close, he said finally, ascending the staircase with careful, deliberate steps. The surface greeted them with a stark contrast to the damp stillness of the tunnels. A cold wind whipped through the derelict cityscape, carrying with it the faint hum of distant Nyvarian drones. The skeletal remains of human structures loomed around them, casting jagged shadows against the moonlit sky. Dezryn paused at the base of a crumbling skyscraper, his hand raised in a silent signal for Lysara to stop. He crouched low, scanning the horizon for movement. Lysara mirrored his stance, her sapphire eyes darting between the shadows. What are you looking for? She whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. Anything out of place, Dezryn replied, his gaze never wavering. Movement, lights, anything that doesn't belong. Lysara frowned. Everything about this place feels wrong. How? Can you tell what doesn't belong? Dezryn allowed himself a faint smile. You learn to feel it. Trust me, you'll get there. They stayed crouched for several tense moments before Dezryn signaled for her to follow. They moved quickly but quietly, weaving through the ruins like ghosts. Every step brought them closer to the rebel outpost but also deeper into enemy territory. As they navigated a particularly treacherous stretch of rubble, Lysara spoke again, her voice low. What happens when we reach your allies? What do you plan to do with me? Dezryn glanced over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. That depends on you, he said. On me? She asked, her tone sharp. You're not exactly a typical recruit, Dezryn replied, his voice laced with dry humor. Some people will see you as a threat. Others might see you as an asset. How you handle yourself will decide which one they believe. Lysara's gaze hardened. And what about you? What do you see me as? Dezryn stopped abruptly, turning to face her. The question hung in the air between them, charged and unresolved. For a moment, he struggled to find an answer, the weight of her gaze pressing against him like a physical force. "I don't know yet," he admitted finally, "but I know you're not what I expected." Lysara blinked, caught off guard by his honesty. Before she could respond, a distant sound shattered the fragile moment. A low mechanical whine that sent a chill down Dezryn's spine. "Drones," he muttered, his hand reaching instinctively for his blaster. "They're closer than I thought." Lysara tensed, her sapphire eyes scanning the darkness. "How many?" "Doesn't matter," Dezryn said. "We can't fight them here. Come on." He grabbed her hand without thinking, pulling her into the shadow of a nearby structure. They crouched together, their backs pressed against the cold, crumbling wall. Dezryn's grip on her hand was firm, grounding, but not painful. The whine of the drones grew louder, their searchlights cutting through the night like blades. Dezryn's heart pounded as he calculated their next move. Lysara, despite her composed exterior, was gripping his hand just as tightly. When the lights swept dangerously close, Dezryn shifted his position, placing himself between Lysara and the open sky. The move was instinctive, protective, and it didn't escape her notice. "You're shielding me," she whispered, her tone a mix of incredulity and gratitude. "Don't read too much into it," Dezryn replied, his voice barely audible. "It's just tactics." The corner of her mouth twitched as if she wanted to smile but didn't dare. The drones lingered for what felt like an eternity before finally moving on. Dezryn waited until the whine of their engines faded into the distance before exhaling a shaky breath. "That was too close," he muttered, releasing her hand. Lysara flexed her fingers, the ghost of his touch lingering on her skin. "You're good at this," she said softly. "Surviving?" Dezryn asked with a wry smile. "It's not exactly a skill I wanted to master." "No," Lysara said, her voice steadier now. "At protecting people." Dezryn blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity in her words. He didn't know how to respond, so he simply turned and started walking again. Lysara followed, her thoughts swirling with emotions she didn't fully understand. They reached the outskirts of the rebel outpost just before dawn. The first rays of sunlight painted the ruins in shades of gold and crimson, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. The outpost itself was a makeshift fortress built into the remains of a collapsed shopping mall. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, their faces hard and weathered from years of resistance. Dezryn approached cautiously, raising a hand in a gesture of peace. The guards recognized him immediately, their stances relaxing slightly, though their eyes remained wary. "Dezryn," one of them said, a stocky man with a scar running down his cheek. "You made it, and you brought company." Lysara stepped forward, her posture regal despite the grime and exhaustion. The guards' eyes widened as they took in her appearance, recognition flickering across their faces. "Is that?" one of them began, but Dezryn cut him off. "She's with me," he said firmly, "and she's not a threat." The guards exchanged uneasy glances but eventually nodded, stepping aside to let them pass. Dezryn led Lysara into the heart of the outpost where the rebels' makeshift command center hummed with activity. As they entered, all eyes turned to them, the murmur of conversation fading into tense silence. Lysara felt the weight of their stares, the unspoken questions and accusations hanging in the air. Dezryn stepped forward, his voice steady and commanding. "This is Lysara. She's here because she chose to leave the Empire. She's not our enemy." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that settled over the room like a storm cloud. Lysara met their gazes head-on, her chin held high. "I know what I represent to you," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "But I am not the Empire. I am here to fight against it, just as you are. Judge me by my actions, not my past." For a moment, there was only silence. Then slowly a few nods of agreement rippled through the crowd. The tension in the room began to ease, though it didn't disappear entirely. Dezryn glanced at Lysara, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. She had passed the first test, but the hardest challenges were yet to come. As the rebels returned to their tasks, Dezryn leaned closer to Lysara, his voice low. "Welcome to the Resistance." Lysara allowed herself a small smile, the first genuine one in what felt like ages. For the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope, not just for the cause, but for herself. But even as they settled into the outpost, Dezryn couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was far from over. The battle for freedom had only just begun, and their fragile alliance would be tested in ways neither of them could predict. The days that followed were a whirlwind of introductions, plans, and uneasy glances. Lysara felt every pair of eyes on her as she walked through the rebel outpost, whispers trailing in her wake. Some stared with suspicion, others with outright hostility. Few were bold enough to confront her, but their distrust was palpable. Dezryn remained by her side whenever he could, his presence a shield against the worst of the skepticism. Still, even his reputation wasn't enough to silence all. The dissent. "She's a liability," one of the rebel commanders, a sharp-featured woman named Ellen, said during a strategy meeting. "You're asking us to trust someone who was part of the regime that's hunted us for years." "I'm not asking you to trust her," Dezryn replied, his tone calm but firm. "I'm asking you to trust me. Lysara's already proven her loyalty by risking her life to get here. If that's not enough, then you can take it up with me." Lysara, seated beside him, met Ellen's glare with a steady gaze. "I understand your hesitation," she said, her voice even. "But I have no love for the Empire. I'm here because I believe in what you're fighting for. If you give me a chance, I'll prove it." Ellen leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing. "Words are easy. Actions take time." "Then give me time," Lysara said, her tone resolute. The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, Ellen gave a reluctant nod. "Fine. But if she steps out of line, it's on you, Dezryn." Dezryn nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his face. "Understood." As the meeting broke up, Lysara turned to him, her voice low. "Thank you." Dezryn shrugged, his expression unreadable. "Don't thank me yet. We've still got a lot to prove." Proving herself wasn't easy. The rebels put Lysara to work almost immediately, assigning her tasks that tested her endurance and resourcefulness. She repaired broken equipment, scouted the surrounding area for supplies, and even helped fortify the outpost defenses. Through it all, Dezryn was her constant companion, guiding her through the intricacies of rebel life. He showed her how to navigate the complex social dynamics of the outpost, how to spot hidden dangers in the ruins, and how to hold her own in an argument without losing the respect of her peers. Their bond deepened with each passing day, forged in the crucible of shared struggle. Lysara found herself looking forward to their conversations, the moments of levity they shared amidst the chaos. She admired his resilience, his unwavering commitment to the cause, and the quiet strength that underpinned his every action. For his part, Dezryn couldn't help but be drawn to Lysara's determination. She had stepped into a world that was entirely foreign to her, yet she faced each challenge with grace and grit. He saw in her the same fire that burned within him, a refusal to be broken by circumstance. But as their connection grew, so too did the danger. The first real test of their alliance came one cold moonlit night. Dezryn was leading a small team on a mission to retrieve medical supplies from an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the city. Lysara had insisted on coming along, despite Dezryn's initial reluctance. "I can handle myself," she had said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Now as they approached the warehouse, Dezryn found himself regretting his decision. The building loomed before them, its shattered windows like empty eye sockets staring into the night. "Stay sharp," Dezryn said, his voice low. "These places are prime territory for Nyvarian patrols." The team spread out, moving cautiously, through the shadows. Lysara stuck close to Dezryn, her senses heightened. Inside the warehouse was a labyrinth of rusted shelves and overturned crates. The air was thick with dust, and every creak of the floorboard sent shivers down Dezryn's spine. They found the supplies in a back corner, hidden beneath a pile of debris. As the team worked to load the crates onto a makeshift sled, Dezryn's unease grew. "We're taking too long," he muttered, glancing toward the entrance. "Let's pick up the pace." His instincts proved correct. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the building, followed by the unmistakable hum of Nyvarian weapons. "Patrol," one of the rebels hissed, panic creeping into his voice. "Everyone, stay calm," Dezryn said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. "We stick to the plan." The team moved quickly but quietly, pushing the sled toward a side exit. Lysara stayed close to Dezryn, her eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. They were almost to the door when a Nyvarian soldier stepped into view, his weapon trained on them. "Drop it," the soldier barked, his voice metallic and cold. For a moment, no one moved. Then Dezryn acted, drawing his blaster in one fluid motion. The first shot took the soldier down, but the sound echoed through the building like a gunshot in a canyon. "Go!" Dezryn shouted, pushing the sled toward the exit. The team sprinted through the door, the supplies rattling behind them. Lysara covered their retreat, her movements fluid and precise as she fired at the pursuing soldiers. Outside, the night erupted into chaos. The rebels scattered, using the ruins for cover as the Nyvarians closed in. Dezryn and Lysara stayed together, their movements perfectly synchronized. As they ducked behind a collapsed wall, Dezryn glanced at Lysara. "You okay?" "I'm fine," she replied, her voice steady despite the danger. They exchanged a brief, understanding look before continuing their escape. By the time they returned to the outpost, the adrenaline had worn off, leaving them both exhausted. The supplies were secured, the team accounted for, but the cost of the mission weighed heavily on them. Dezryn sat on the edge of a makeshift cot, his head in his hands. Lysara approached cautiously, her expression softening as she saw the strain etched into his features. "You did well out there," she said, her voice gentle. Dezryn looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "We lost someone," he said quietly. Lysara nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "You saved more than you lost. That's all anyone can ask of you." For a moment they sat in silence, the unspoken connection between them growing stronger. Dezryn reached for her hand, his touch tentative but reassuring. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lysara smiled faintly, her fingers curling around his. "We're in this together, remember?" Dezryn nodded, a flicker of hope returning to his eyes. Together they faced an uncertain future, but in that moment they found solace in each other. The outpost was buzzing with activity. The medical supplies from the recent mission had breathed new life into the rebel camp, but tension hung thick in the air. Lysara stood at the edge of the courtyard, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The towering ruins of the old world stretched in every direction, a stark reminder of the fragility of their existence. Dezryn approached her, his footsteps deliberate. His presence was grounding, a reminder that she wasn't navigating this alone. "They've called for a war council," he said, his voice low. Lysara turned to face him, her expression resolute. "What's the plan?" "They want to attack the Citadel." The Citadel was the seat of Nyvarian power on Earth, a heavily fortified stronghold that symbolized the Empire's iron grip on the planet. Striking it wasn't just risky, it was audacious. Lysara's brow furrowed. "Do we have the resources for something like that?" Dezryn shook his head. "Not yet, but we've intercepted plans for a convoy carrying advanced weaponry. If we can seize it, we'll stand a chance. And if we don't, then this rebellion dies." Lysara's gaze drifted back to the horizon. The weight of her decision pressed down on her. She wasn't just another soldier in this fight. Her knowledge of Nyvarian tactics and technology made her an invaluable asset. But more than that, she had something to prove. To the rebels, to Dezryn, and to herself. "I'm in," she said firmly. Dezryn's lips quirked into a faint smile. I knew you would be. The night of the convoy ambush was cold and unforgiving. The rebels had gathered in a secluded valley, hidden among the crags and shadows. The air was heavy with anticipation, every sound amplified by the stillness. Lysara crouched beside Dezryn, her eyes scanning the road below. The convoy would be here soon, its path predictable but heavily guarded. Positions. Dezryn ordered quietly, his voice cutting through the tension. The rebels moved like phantoms, slipping into the darkness with practiced precision. Lysara stayed close to Dezryn, her pulse steady despite the chaos that was about to unfold. The first vehicle appeared moments later, its headlights slicing through the gloom. Behind it, a line of armored transports followed, each bristling with Nyvarian weaponry. Dezryn raised his hand, signaling the rebels to wait. Timing was everything. As the convoy neared the ambush point, Dezryn gave the signal. Explosions erupted along the road, shattering the stillness and throwing the lead vehicle into disarray. The rebels sprang into action, swarming the convoy with calculated ferocity. Lysara moved with a precision born of years of training. Her blaster was an extension of her will, each shot finding its mark. She covered Dezryn's flank as he led the charge, their movements perfectly synchronized. The Nyvarians fought back with brutal efficiency, but they were unprepared for the rebels' tenacity. Within minutes, the convoy was overwhelmed, its cargo secured. As the dust settled, Dezryn approached Lysara, his expression a mix of relief and admiration. We did it, she nodded, her chest heaving from exertion. It's a start. But their victory was short-lived. A low hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. Lysara's blood ran cold. Reinforcements, she said, her voice taut. Dezryn's jaw tightened. We can't hold this position. Get the weapons out of here. I'll cover the retreat. I'm not leaving you, Lysara said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Dezryn met her gaze, a flicker of something unspoken passing between them. Lysara, we do this together, she interrupted. Dezryn hesitated for a moment before nodding. Together. The battle that followed was a blur of chaos and desperation. Lysara and Dezryn fought side by side, their bond an unbreakable anchor in the storm. The Nyvarian reinforcements were relentless, but the rebels held their ground, long enough for the weapons to be evacuated. When the last of the transports disappeared into the night, Dezryn signaled the retreat. The rebels melted into the shadows, leaving behind nothing but destruction and confusion. Lysara stayed close to Dezryn as they navigated the labyrinth of ruins, their movements quick but careful. By the time they reached the safety of the outpost, the first light of dawn was breaking over the horizon. The camp erupted into cheers as the rebels returned, their spirits buoyed by the victory. Dezryn and Lysara stood at the edge of the crowd, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and quiet triumph. You were incredible out there, Dezryn said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. Lysara smiled faintly, her eyes meeting his. I couldn't have done it without you. For a moment, the world around them faded, leaving only the two of them. Dezryn reached for her hand, his touch gentle but steady. Thank you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lysara squeezed. His hand, her expression softening. For what? For being here. For believing in this fight. For believing in me. She smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Dezryn's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer, before he leaned in, his lips brushing against hers in a kiss that was both tender and fierce. The cheers of the rebels faded into the background as Lysara lost herself in the moment. For the first time in years, she felt truly free, not just from the chains of the Empire, but from the doubts and fears that had once held her back. The weeks that followed were a blur of planning and preparation. The weapons from the convoy gave the rebels a fighting chance against the Nyvarians, and the attack on the citadel loomed ever closer. Lysara and Dezryn worked tirelessly, their partnership becoming the cornerstone of the rebellion's efforts. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, a beacon of hope in the darkness. When the day of the final assault arrived, Lysara stood at the forefront of the rebel forces, her gaze fixed on the towering walls of the citadel. Dezryn stood beside her, his presence a source of unwavering strength. "We're going to win this," he said, his voice steady. Lysara nodded, her heart swelling with determination. Together. As the rebels charged forward, Lysara felt a surge of hope. They were fighting for something greater than themselves, a future worth fighting for. And no matter what the outcome, she knew one thing for certain. She had found her place, her purpose, and her partner in Dezryn. Together they would rewrite the stars.